sex trafficking is happening right here in the United States because of online media, social media. Our children are more vulnerable to the predatory tactics of traffickers than they have ever been. I could go on and on about statistics of trafficking just happening right here in Kansas City. I remember a couple months after our first prayer meeting, we did an all-night solemn assembly to pray for this issue, and I was so struck the next week when the bust that happened, the breakthrough, wasn't in Cambodia or Bangkok, it was right here in Kansas City. On the front cover of every newspaper in Kansas City was a story about a massive trafficking ring that had been broken up and smashed right here in our own backyard. And we continued to plow away on those Monday night prayer sessions every single week, laboring, and we began to see bust after bust. Right here in Kansas City, 40 busts in the first few years that we were doing this. And that prior to that, there had never been one single bust in Kansas City. But beloved, it's going on. The sex industry is predatory. This is something that touches and affects all of our lives in some way, shape, or form. We all know people who have been affected by this issue, whether directly or indirectly. Okay, let's move on to the roots. The roots are the demand for illicit sex that creates and necessitates the industry of exploitation. The demand side of this equation is primarily men who buy sex. 99% of those who buy sex are men. Now, this is not a few bad apples on the fringes of society. As we traveled the world making various documentaries on this issue, one of the things that we discovered is that the men who are participating in this industry through the purchase of another human being by renting their body for their own sexual self-gratification are not guys in the shady part of the park late at night who probably have horns growing out of their head if we are ever to see them. No, they are a part of our normal everyday society. We talked to dozens and dozens of trafficking survivors who told us the men who came to them were mostly married, were family men, were doctors and lawyers and law enforcement officials, government officials, celebrities, people in every walk of life. This is an issue that cuts across every socioeconomic class, every religion, every culture. These men were everyday men, but it wasn't a few here or there. What we saw is that there were vast scores of men, beyond anything that you can comprehend, that were actually participating in this. They did studies in Cambodia and Brazil and found that 70% of men were buying sex on a regular basis in these countries. In Western civilized countries like Germany and Spain, there are 1.5 million purchases of sex per day in these countries. What we are talking about is an explosion of a global phenomenon in which male sexuality has been hijacked by pornography and is now fueling the explosion of prostitution around the world. The thing that I need to say about this when we break down this equation is that prostitution and sex trafficking would not exist without male demand. If men stopped buying women and children for sex today, the whole commercial sex industry would implode and we would see the largest exodus of human beings from systematic oppression, exploitation, and violence that the world has ever seen. That is the most simple way to understand this equation. I want to read to you a quote from one male sex buyer to understand the attitude that fuels their appetites and the corrosive effect of pornography on one's psyche. He said to me, this was one man I interviewed, he said, I don't even care about what's going on in her world. I don't care what she thinks. I don't care what she feels. I don't care what she wants in life. There's one thing only, and that is to take care of what I'm feeling inside. Whatever I'm willing to pay for is what she's gonna do. She's a prostitute, she's not a person. She's just a commodity. When I strip her of her humanity and she's just an object, then I can take an object and I can do whatever I want with it and have no remorse. This is the attitude that underpins the appetites of men around the world participating in the commercial sex industry that is resulting in the destruction of so many human lives. Underneath this attitude, the seedbed, so to speak, that is cultivating these roots of demand is the soil of a pornographic culture. A pornographic culture is a culture in which boys and girls grow up with pornography as the wallpaper of their lives. It is a culture in which the dehumanizing and hypersexualizing story of pornography has seeped into every form of popular media that socializes our children and imprints their sexuality. In a pornographic culture, men are cast as sexual predators, women are cast as sexual objects, and sex itself is cast as a meaningless recreational act or as a vehicle for the subjugation and abuse of women. Men do not just suddenly decide one day that they're going to go out and participate in the commercial sex industry. They don't just one day decide, I'm gonna go fly over to Bangkok and visit the red light district there. Women don't just suddenly decide one day that they're gonna join this industry. We live in a facilitating culture, a social lubricating culture, a pornographic culture. We live in a culture that is telling stories, that is socializing young boys and young girls to participation in this industry, and therefore it has grown into a $100 billion per year industry that is affecting so many lives.